going on. And you and I had a great conversation a couple of weeks ago. We were just doing a catch-up call and saying what's going on. And you made some really great points about what's going on in the world. And there's a lot of the ain't it awful, there's a lot of the collapse and so forth, but there's also some new stuff that's dynamically coming across our field of vision. So I'd like you just to address how do you see this? What's going on out there? What's important for us to be paying attention to as we start to think about it shaping a better future for all of us?
Well, yeah, I mean, as we well know, there's incredible global instability. So I've been in practice for 43 years and I've never seen anything like this. And I think what makes it so difficult, and I thought was well captured by one of my previous clients, which was Mark Carney, when he gave a speech in Davos. Because when I met him, I was hired by him for the Bank of Canada when he was the governor. Is basically the incredible destabilization of the world and the world order. And I think what I see in my client population around the world is that is exactly what's happening. And people are, for the first time in my lifetime, actually turning away from the United States
Mhm.
in significant numbers. And I mean purposefully. They're not just casually turning away from us. And a lot of that has to do with the leadership of this country right now, of which, the old order is changing. And what they've discovered is that their old friend isn't much of a friend anymore.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so in my work, that makes a huge difference because traditionally, if you even look at some of the things that we counsel people about in their preparedness, as far as their developing of resilience plans and crisis management plans, is that, you look at your supply chain. Well, people don't want to buy from the US anymore. And so what's happening is that people are starting to look for all kinds of alternatives to us.
Yeah.
Probably the first time in my lifetime. And I mean, if you just look at the trade compacts that have been signed recently, well, for example, the EU, I mean, there's four that I can think of right off the top of my head. They just did a whole new one with Mexico. They actually created one with South America. Primarily, I think it was Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and Paraguay,
Mhm.
which they'd been working on for 25 years, but they wanted to have options other than us.
Mhm.
There's a whole new trade agreement with India in the EU. And
Mhm.
so what that says is that all of a sudden you might have always bought certain things from the US because you needed or wanted them or because of the quality or whatever. But now people are saying, we don't like the US particularly right now. We don't like the leadership and we want out. And so this is the first time in my life where I've seen there's a huge pivot away from the US as far as a supplier. And
Mhm.
so if you look at business, that's a big deal because if you make anything that people buy, some tangible object, you might not be getting it from us anymore. And
Yes.
so I think that's a huge, huge shift. And so what I see in many of my clients around the world is that we have become kind of the piranha, right? I mean, we are really something that people don't want to deal with. Is they either don't want to deal with the tariffs or they don't want to deal with the ridiculous political behavior that we have. And so I think there's a huge shift in really towards us being isolated in a way that I've never seen before. And so I think for anybody who has a business, it's a big deal. It's a
Mhm.
big deal. So I think that's the first thing I would say overall. And then I just sort of looking at what I had wanted to talk with you about. I think we're not considered as trustworthy and we're not considered as being a real partner anymore. And
Mhm.
that is painful. I don't know about you, but I feel it's painful.
Absolutely.
And so I think there's a big shift in what I see in my corporate clients. Then when you look at what's happening here in the United States, I mean, democracy is flashing red, right? I mean, it is in real trouble here.
Mhm.
And I have many, like on LinkedIn, I have a lot of connections from all over the world. And they're constantly sending me notes and DMing me about all kinds of things. And one of them is like, "Oh my God. I mean, is anybody awake in your country? I
Hmm.
mean, really?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
anybody awake?" And I do this for a living, right? So I get up every morning really early, like at 5 or 4:30, and I read, a whole cadre of publications before I ever start my day.
Mhm.
Like the Wall Street Journal and the Economist and the Washington Post and the New York Times and and the list goes on. And so I know exactly what's going on. So my friends call me. Well, I no, don't call me. You know, paper, and part of it is I think it's because people are just so overwhelmed with their life and they're overwhelmed with what's going on. And this includes executives, the people aren't following it, or they might be in a business where they feel they can't speak out or they can't speak up.
Yes.
Look at the law firms that folded to Trump right away at the very beginning of his second term. I mean, that's a good example of that. So I think there's that kind of concern that we are slipping into fascism at a pretty damn fast rate and no one's paying attention to it or doing anything about it.
Mhm.
And so I think that's a huge issue. And so because of that, I think what's going on is that, again, people are looking at the United States in a very different way, not as a trustworthy partner and
Mhm.
not as somebody they want to hang out with. So we're seeing supply chains begin to shift, clients not wanting to work with people from the US anymore. We've lost 4 clients who love me, but they can't work with me anymore because I'm US based.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I get it. I get it.
Yeah.
Right.
Some countries are just making that decision not to work with our own businesses here that
Right.
we've had long-term relationships with. Yeah.
Right. And
So,
and I think just sort of building on that, I just want to say that the thing that really leaves me probably the most sleepless at night, to be honest with you, based on everything I've just talked about, is actually the mis and disinformation in this country that is killing us.
mhm.
And you know, people again don't follow or follow news. They see something online because they're in their heads and their phone all the time, and they just immediately go, oh my gosh, that's so interesting. They don't validate it. And so I've actually taught classes on mis and disinformation to my clients because people don't even think about validating things. They just assume, oh, it's from this person, it must be good. And so they pass it on. So we are in some ways as big a problem as anybody else is. And
Mhm.
so I think between the mis and disinformation, the fact that we're constantly have our heads in our phones, I think that is a huge problem.
Mhm.
Yeah, I will also say too, as that sometimes one of the things that I've been feeling in the zeitgeist is that because people are so wary to trust anything, it could be fake, it could be AI. Like,
Totally.
what does that create? It could also create apathy too.
Right.
Not just spreading more misinformation, but just being like, I don't trust anything now. So I'm
Right.
just going to tune it out.
Right.
It's just fodder.
Yeah, and I think AI is going to be is a big problem now and will continue to even become a bigger problem. Creating videos, I mean, when you see a video anymore, do you know it's real or not? When you hear an audio, you don't know it's really real. And so I think there's a huge concern that people are always wondering and asking themselves, what's going on, right? So
Especially
I think
when major news outlets and journalistic, entities have been actually spreading some fake AI stuff, and then they retract it and say, "We're sorry, that actually wasn't a real video. We misspoke." But you would think that that due diligence and critical thinking would be in place with some of these larger journalistic institutions.
right. Well, I mean, the White House publishes AI adjusted videos all the time.
Yeah.
That's propaganda, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
So I think when you can't trust what you see, then I think there's a tendency for people to just throw up their hands and go like, I'm not going to follow anything because
Yes.
I can't stomach it. And
No.
that's a problem. And I get it, I get it, but that just makes for more apathy, I think, as we try to work through this.
So part of what that means to it, it sort of reminds me of when we walk into companies and or universities that we work with or whatever else, and they got a really sticky problem. And the problem isn't actually a problem. It's an issue you have to address, a problem you can solve, but an issue you have to continually address. And also when you hit a problem, sometimes it's beyond fixing anyway. It
Right.
has to be transformed. And my feeling is that there's a lot of what's in our society and in our world, especially in the US right now, that is beyond fixable. It needs to be transformed.
Mhm.
And part of our job here, I think, is in transformation is to help some parts of it fall apart. Keep the good stuff, but let some of the stuff that's not working for us fall apart and reinvent it. It's
Hmm.
like Bucky Fuller talks about, you don't get anywhere by trying to resist the issue. You just have to replace the old model with a new model.
Right.
And I think that's kind of where we're at right now. Would you agree in the US?
Yeah, I think that that is true, and I think that's, as we approach our 250th anniversary this year, that's even a little bit more unnerving, frankly, because I think for you to be able to transform something means people have to, first of all, admit that there's a problem, and then secondarily, actually actively engage to try and solve it. And for a country, I think that's a challenge as large as ours, as spread out as ours is, and then with just the sheer division
Mm-hmm.
that we have now. I mean, yeah, just the division alone, I think, is something I've never seen in my life. And it's deeply, deeply concerning to me.
In a way, it's our 250th anniversary. But you think back on those times when the founding fathers and mothers and so forth that put this country together in a whole new way. They stole a lot of great ideas from the American Indians at that point because they had better ways of dealing with problem solving and creating than many of us, and it was more of in many ways, more of a democracy.
Mhm.
And so we're at this point. Several friends have talked about the fact that we maybe need a new constitution and a new Bill of Rights because you go to Scandinavian countries and they have rights for education. They have a right to health care. We don't have those rights. We have nice rights, but maybe it's time for us to look at what constitutes our strategies and structures for this country, not just who's in charge and who's not in charge, or who's grifting and who's not grifting.
Yeah, I think in the times that we're in right now, I can't imagine that happening in this.
Yeah,
I can't visualize that happening because that takes willing partners on all sides.
yeah.
And, if essentially fascist governments don't want willing partners on all sides. They just want a bunch of oligarchs and them, and they basically run the show. And that's kind of what this is right now in many ways.
Well, there is, but there's a hope part for me that it kind of maybe it's too optimistic or who knows. But there's a woman at Harvard by the name of Erica Chenoweth who did a study of all the uh, Balkan states and other places that have overthrown fascist governments.
Mhm.
And she says it doesn't take that much. It takes 3.5% of the population to really be solid behind getting rid of what's there.
Right.
And
That's the whole theory behind protests and how many people show up. And yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, but with the No King's Day, for example, we had 3.6%
Mhm.
of our population actually show up for that thing. We have another one coming up in March 28th. So people can change things.
Mhm.
It doesn't take the grand majority to all hold hands. It just takes people of commitment and imagination. Actually, we need social imagination, an ability to imagine a different way of doing business, a different way of structuring ourselves. And I think we're kind of at that turning point.
I hope so. I don't quite see it yet, but I hope so.
Well, I don't think we're ready yet. I think we're at the point where we need to be ready, but we're not ready. Your job is to get the world ready, right?
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
No pressure, huh? No pressure,
No
Regina.
pressure. I read your materials and it says we prepare people for these things. Well, you're supposed to prepare us for this.
Oh, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned to you Dwayne Elgin, who's a guy that we all know, and he's written a book called Choosing Earth several years ago, 2019 or 2022. He said, we're in a dark time, and what we need is a ritual of initiation. We
Mhm.
need to basically grow up. We had lunch with him several years ago, and he'd just come back from traveling around the world. And I asked him, my perception is, as you see this, we're pretty much at an adolescent stage. Would you agree? He says, absolutely. And that's thematically in his book that later came out, that we're at an adolescence and we need to grow up. And this takes some ritualized shifts in who we are in our consciousness. And part of that is when you do that, that maturation point, it's a struggle. There's a bit of a sorrow there. There's a bit of a pain that goes with any kind of an initiation shift, and there's a grieving that you have to grieve. Like a young boy in a village will have to let go of his childhood in order to be the man in the village. And so we kind of need to grow up. Uh, would you concur with that? And if so, do you have any advice for us about growing up?
Well, individually, I think if you look at companies individually, I think they have the opportunity to do that. I think they can internally manage that with themselves.
Mhm.
But for the country, I can't quite envision that at this point. And I don't think I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here, but I don't think in my lifetime it's going to change.
Yes. And maybe that's the point. Maybe that's our job is to, in our age group for sure, can we leave the world in a much better place? Maybe not, but maybe we can prepare the ground so something else can sprout here.
Mm-hmm. Well, what we're seeing around the world is not just what's happening here is happening in many countries. I mean, the shift to autocratic governments and fascism is happening everywhere. So it's not just us, sadly. It's a lot of other countries as well. And you're certainly seeing that in Europe. Places like Hungary is a good example. You're seeing it in places in South America. And so there's a shift going on. And I think sort of building on your comments, I think part of it has to do with the disengagement of the public with their own government, whether it's local or state or nationally. And it's easier to sort of, and again, because people are busy, they have busy lives, they blah, 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 blah. And then consequently what happens is they're not willing to spend the time or the energy to engage. And when you disengage from your government, then it allows others who are more devious or mischievous to gain power and move forward. So I think it would be great to say that that's going to happen in the next few years, but I don't know. It's going to take people willing to stand up and put down their phone and do other things.
Yeah. 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 I know we've all worked on different things to make change in this world with everything from doing vision. We've done visions with cities and so forth that have changed things. But that was more focused on, at that point in time, our work was more focused on making this a economically flourishing city.
Mhm.
And also it's like in San Rafael, we helped them put together a thing where they developed 700 new units for affordable housing and things like this. So those are great things to do, but that doesn't change the overall structure. It changes what it is. It's like you said, business, yes, can do things. Even universities can do some stuff and cities can do some stuff, and we all need to do our part. But we also got to, it's like beads on a string. You have to string the beads together to make the necklace. And that's
And I think, and perhaps what will happen is, I mean, there are little pockets of the United States that are actually still very grounded. They have a good government and are willing to do work for their citizens and be able to, create a democratic environment. But there are other places in this country that don't. And so to your point, I mean, there will be places where the pockets will flourish and a lot of places where it won't. And what does that mean? I mean, there are clients of mine all over the world who keep thinking that we're just going to break up, that the United States over time will just be,
Yeah,
there'll
that's
be the
my
West
question.
Coast, and everybody in the middle is just going to be whatever, right?
yeah.
And maybe that's what's going to happen. Maybe it's too big, based on the fact that mis and disinformation drives everything. The fact that you can choose your own echo chamber and stay there the rest of your life, and that happens all the time. That maybe what we do is that we work hard to try and save the nation, and then at some point we realize that we're just going to end up having to segment the nation, and it'll turn into something else. I mean, I don't want to be a downer about that, but I think we have to look at what are the options here that we have.
I know from doing scenario planning that one of the things you do is you run several lines of scenarios, as you know, in parallel. Some will be um, big and bold, and some will be more conservative, and some will say, "Oh, it's going to be tough." And so there's a whole different scenarios. But what you do, the trick there is to link them and find the best of all of those that interlink. So there may be an interlinking between regionalization, which I really agree that that's some of the solution points is our local communities and local communities pulling together and things like this, even more so than what they do already. And it should also be some linkage to some larger thing, even if the US breaks up and it becomes, regionals, three regionals or six regionals, whatever it becomes, rather than a united. If that happens, then we have to make the best of that as well. But perhaps there is a linkage behind it. I know there's a group of people working right now that are starting to plan what could we do as a country to link these things together. So I think that's true for even like you talk about business. Business can also link together.
Sure.
One
Well, we're
business
seeing that
links.
benefit right now. I mean, you look at the impact that RFK Jr.'s had on vaccines and the health of the United States. And what you're seeing is that there are collectives already happening where medical groups and medical societies are all, and state departments of health are all creating their own coalitions
Yeah.
to basically provide what they believe is science-based medical advice to be able to refute
Mhm.
the RFK Juniors of the world. And so that is going on, but it's regionalized. And so it's like the East Coast has one, the West Coast has one. There's some in the kind of the Great Lakes area. So people are doing that in relationship to certain topics, like medicine is a good example. And I would imagine that you could see that happening in other areas where it made sense. That would be maybe business types or maybe around particular topics. But there is such deep division in the country that, and I know there's many groups that are trying to do local community groups, trying to get, the two people that hate each other to talk to each other. And maybe over time that would help, but in the big scheme of things, I don't know. I hate to think that it's I can't imagine that it's going to solve this problem in the next 20 or 30 years.
Well, I know there's a fellow that named Greg Sattel that I follow that has written several really good books on market innovations and other things like this too. But he also took part in a lot of the breakup of the Soviet Union states that recombined, and also and took part in some of the overthrow of some of the dictatorships, like Milosevic and others. And what he found was the way you create a movement is not by everybody holding hands in mass. What you
Right.
actually do is you create these little coalitions of pockets of really passionate groups. And then those start the movement of things to go. And then the movement starts seeing, oh, you're sort of like our part of the movement. And so we're working together on this. And then it becomes the bigger movement.
Yep.
It's not the other way around. You don't just say, okay, now we got to have this big lump
Right.
move it.
Just like guilds and unions that were formed in this country,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Right. Well, and actually, and that certainly, I mean, back in the old days of the Chamber of Commerce, when I was the chairman in '91, I led a trade mission to the Soviet Union,
Right.
and which included also going to Poland and at that time Czechoslovakia. And in every one of those countries, we met with the leaders, the actual government leaders. And I remember meeting with Lech Wałęsa in Poland and in Valhavel in Czechoslovakia. We had dinner. We had a dinner party with them and my delegation of 50 executives. And it was that's what they talked about, is that you had to create this energy, this story, and you needed to bring people along, and they did successfully, my goodness. But again, that was a lot of, again, a smaller country. They were all, the majority of the country was all moving in that direction, right? They wanted to be released from the oppressors that they were being held down by. And so
Yeah.
that made a big difference. But it was not 3.5%. We're talking 50, 60% of a country. And they actually were able to make that happen. So yeah, I totally understand that.
Yeah. We took part in a part of the an outgrowth of some of that with hosting young entrepreneurs from Russia who
Mm-hmm.
were, the breakup of the, Soviet Union and so forth like this. And so they all wanted to start businesses and they all wanted to find out more about business and being entrepreneurs. And so we hosted two of them in our house. We had a large house in the marina, and we hosted two of them there. And one of the young men, we took him over just a block away to Safeway, the local marina Safeway there, and it's just filled with everything, everything you ever want. And he got physically sick because he said it was just overwhelming to see what he grew up with and what we had.
Mm-hmm.
It just overwhelmed him. So there's an adjustment, a psychic adjustment to these kind of changes. It's not just oh yeah, now I'll figure out how to be an entrepreneur. No, he had to figure out what he was in relation to things. And that's what we're going to have to do too, I think, is figure out who we are in relation to a different kind of pattern, I think, in the future.
We are calling out to all you future shapers out there, folks and brands creating more value and enriching life. Are you or do you know an inspiring leader or a brand building a more regenerative future? We want to hear from you. At Beam, we are a design and strategy agency working with all levels of leadership and businesses, co-creating futures that's more rewarding for people, businesses, and our planet. Whether you are interested in being featured in our media or ready to take your enterprise into a new era, please visit us at beaminc.com. We would love to connect with you and explore shaping the future together.